What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Kason.
Let's see. Let's pull up the list here. What are we talking about today? Oh, do you hear? Hyper Light Drifter
Oh, yeah.
got a co-op mode this week. That's crazy. Of course, it's local co-op. You know, I don't understand the point of that anymore. Does anyone do local co-op?
That's a good question.
At all anymore?
Hyper Light Drifter is kind of a fast-paced game, right? It would be pretty hard to do without a high-speed internet connection.
That's true.
It would be hard to implement.
Lag. If there's any lag, it
would ruin the whole thing. The whole experience.
Not work out. Dang it,
Yeah.
what that? Oh, here
I'll tell you though, I don't do local, although I do sometimes with my wife on the Switch. This game's on the Switch, right? Hyper Light Drifter?
Yeah, it is.
So maybe that's what it's made for. Maybe less for the PC people and more for the Switch people.
Yeah, here's a GIF on Twitter of two guys playing at the same time. Teddy Deef, I guess he's one of the devs, says, "All I want for my birthday is everyone to know our action RPG Hyper Light Drifter has full story co-op. So if you're looking for e.g. Zelda co-op or Secret of Mana type play, please enjoy local friendship." He puts local in brackets, local friendship on PC, Mac, Linux, Switch, PS4, or Xbox One.
There you go.
Now, so I think the way that this works, I should have probably just pulled up the article on it, but I'm pretty sure the way that it works is that like the first player has to sacrifice like one of their health in order to like bring in the other person. But if that person dies, you can kind of just keep doing that. Okay, yeah, he says right here, "I'm proud of the co-op design or how it turned out. Simple but strategic. Player 2 can respawn infinitely, getting 5 HP, but at the cost of 1 HP taken from player 1. So player 2 can take more risks with that 5 times multiplier. But like using health packs, player 2's respawn stuns player 1 for a moment, so timing is crucial." So, I mean, because, like, you know, Hyper Light Drifter has... actually, I don't know if anyone was seeing that. Was anyone seeing that? I don't think they were seeing that. Hold on. Let me put that up
the
again.
GIF or the...
I forgot that I have to switch over here in OBS. Now you can see it. Yeah, so here's the GIF. Shows the two players playing alongside each other. But yeah, so in order to bring this player 2 in, player 1 will get stunned for a second. And then player 2 will have 5 health points and can take more risks because you can just infinitely respawn them, but it takes a 1 hit point away from the player 1 character. So, you know, I was thinking about that and about like balance, right? I think that that's a pretty good way of handling it because it's a really fast-paced game, like you're saying. And so, like, even being stunned for just
bit.
momentary, depending on where you're at, could be, like, pretty fatal. So you have to, like, do it at the right time. But you can just send player 2 up forward to just, like, go and, like, kill a bunch of guys while maybe player 1 hangs back a little bit. I don't know. I want to try it and see how it affects the difficulty, because I think it would make it a lot easier. Maybe that's the point. But I don't have anybody around here who plays Hyper Light Drifter, so
sorry,
not gonna find out. Anyways, Hyper Light Drifter is one of my favorite games, and I'm always down in any kind of like RPG like that for co-op. I wish more games had co-op like Secret of Mana did in Sega Densetsu 3. Like, Parker and I have played the crap out of Sega Densetsu 3, and the game's almost only fun if you're playing it with someone, to me. Like, you can play it on your own. It's fine. But, like, when you're playing with buddies in the Sega Densetsu 3, it's, like, way better. So, if you like Hyper Light Drifter, check that out. Okay. Asen was saying that he watched a little bit of One Punch Man Season 2. We talked about how much we liked the first one. Our highest viewed video on the channel is a One Punch Man video,
Yeah.
and you talk about how much you love it.
I may make a One Punch Man season 2 video. As you can predict, the whole concept is likely to get old at some point, but they quickened the pace a little bit because the animation studio changed, and it's not the same level of animation. It doesn't look the same. In some ways, it looks a little more, I don't know, like grungy, realistic, I guess, but it's way less charming. And some of the characters that they've introduced are just they're not as good. It's not as good, unfortunately. But season 2s are often not as good as season 1s, so that may just be, may just be how it is.
So that was actually one of the things I think that was suggested in Discord to talk about today's. Or maybe, I can't remember where I saw it. I looked at like 7,000 video topics between what we have and what you guys suggested today.
Yeah.
But we were thinking about doing something on, I think it was like, how long can a story go before it inevitably turns bad or something like that. What is it? Because like One Punch Man was almost like every episode was kind of self-contained. I guess they had sort of like an arc over the course of the season where he was like, he became a registered hero, like the really low class one, sort of worked his way up, and he was sort of like training the cyber, what's the guy who's like his apprentice or whatever? Forget his name.
Yeah, the guy. I can't remember either.
Anyways. But it was kind of like just every episode felt pretty self-contained. So, like, where are they going with it in season 2? Is it pretty much the same, like, he's still just stronger than everything and he's bored? Or is it...
Yes, but he encounters a little more challenge, I guess, this time around. But there's one character that he's I guess you would call him kind of like the opposite of One Punch Man. He is incredibly weak, but he looks super buff, and he's got like scars on his face, and he looks, he has this reputation of being like super strong because he accidentally just happened to be at the right place at the right time, I guess. And people thought that he did this amazing thing. And so everyone's afraid of him and nobody will mess with him. But he's actually, in reality, he's incredibly weak. So it's kind of like the opposite character to One Punch Man. So like, that's funny. And it turns out that guy's really good at video games, though. So One Punch Man will play video games with that guy, and that guy will beat him up. Anyway, it's funny. Like, there's still funny moments, and it's not like completely different. It's just not as charming, I guess. I'd probably put it that way.
Yeah, because, like, as far as the story goes, right, like, I feel like that gimmick will have worked for one season, where it's like...
it's not something you can stretch.
They keep making you feel like that, oh, this might be it. Yeah. This might be the time that someone will really challenge him. But then, nah. One punch takes the guy out, and it always turns out that way, and that's part of the humor of it.
Yeah.
But, like, can you really stretch that out again for a whole extra season? Or do you have to finally introduce something to sort of shake it up?
Or you just leave the art as it is and just walk away from it. You don't have to... it doesn't have to evolve into a new thing. It can just stay what it was and just always be what it was. And that season will always be there, and it will never have continued, and it's great,
Well, I don't know anything about the manga, though, because I know the manga...
Yeah, the manga's gone on for forever. And right? That's a good point. I don't know how that keeps it up. Although manga, you can read a whole episode in a manga in like 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Doing it in a TV show where everything's stretched out longer, it's just... I don't know. It's a bit of a waste of resources, I guess.
Alan says you might want to watch Mob Psycho 100.
Everyone tells me about that.
It's like the other story that the creator
did. Yeah. And it's the one that shows that the creator of One Punch Man is actually a pretty talented artist. It's just he purposely drew One Punch Man really bad. But he did Mob Psycho. I haven't seen any of it yet. Everyone's been telling me about it. Ever since I put that video out, people have been talking about it, but I still haven't seen it.
Well, there you go. Is it on like Netflix or where can you watch it?
Mob
Even?
Psycho? That's a good
No.
question.
One Punch season 2.
Oh, One Punch season 2. Well, some of it's on YouTube, and I don't know exactly where to watch the rest of it.
Where you'd see it otherwise.
I'm not saying I watched it on YouTube. I'm just saying some of it's on YouTube, and I don't know where else to find it.
I don't know how people get away with that because like we couldn't even upload that video you made on One Punch Man forever because they kept blocking it, even though it was just clips.
That was stupid. But it is a different company that made it, so I don't know if the same exact rules apply. The distributor is probably the same, so I don't know.
Davros is saying secret Netflix, and I think what he means by that is you log into Netflix, but with your VPN.
You use a VPN, yeah.
And you go to another country for a minute, and you watch One Punch Man somewhere else.
Yep. It looks like it might be on Crunchyroll and Hulu.
Oh, Crunchyroll, okay. Okay, yeah. But I gotta ask this legit. I'm not an anime person. I think everyone knows that now.
Yeah.
But Evangelion just came to Netflix.
Yeah.
Which is supposed to, people make comparisons to Xenogears with that.
Yeah, that was the big, like, 1980s, I think. Like, the big anime from that, like, whole decade. Maybe it was more 90s.
I have not watched it ever. Should I watch that, or should I watch One Punch Season 2? I can only handle one anime a year. Which one should it be?
Well, I'll let the chat answer that one, I guess.
I am currently working on a Xenogears like story analysis video right now. I'm actually going to be doing a collaboration for that video with Pat Holloman from the Game Design Forum. He's been on our podcast once in the past. Wrote a lot of really good books on Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VII, Super Mario World. Dude's awesome. So we're kind of working together on a script for a Xenogears video. Maybe it would be a good idea to watch Evangelion. Now, I if I'm not mistaken, Evangelion's only like 20-something episodes long, right?
Well, I think it went on longer than that, but...
Is it just like one season, or is it like 2? Or if it's not too long, I might give it a shot.
I was going to say, One Punch Man Season 2 will be shorter. So depending on if you have any time commitments.
People are saying Eva is 26 episodes.
Yeah, Made in Abyss is very good. You might want to watch Made in Abyss, Mike, and ditch the other two.
Made in Abyss. What is that? What is that about?
So it's very video game oriented. Actually, it's very they take video gamey themes, I guess, and put it into an anime. But it is essentially, there's like a town on the edge of this massive like pit that goes into the ground, and it's huge. You know, it's like miles and miles across. And the further down you go into the pit, the more mysterious it becomes, and the fewer people who've ever been that deep. And there's like a sickness that comes with it. There's certain kinds of monsters that live on different levels. And there's different like artifacts that can be found that kind of give hints to, you know, what this thing is. It's just this big mystery. So these you know, this group of people decide they're going to go all the way down to the bottom. And I don't want to give away too much. They're young people, very young people. And it starts out so like fun, cutesy, innocent, and it becomes absolutely brutal by the end. It's very interesting. It's one of the best anime that I've seen in a very long time.
Made in Abyss.
Well, yeah, it gets like, and I wish I knew that ahead of time. I watched the first 2 episodes and I was like, oh, I'm going to watch this with my wife. So I invite her over, and she's very, you know, she doesn't watch difficult things. And as the show goes on, it becomes very difficult. And there was a couple scenes in particular that were like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I should not have had you watch this with me. I had no idea it was going here. I'm so sorry. So you'd probably like it a lot. It's very good.
I love watching things that make me want to die inside. Curl up.
This kind of does that a little bit. If you've ever seen the
Abandon
art
all
style,
hope.
it's so it's almost, I don't know, you may not like it as much, but it's almost like chibi-ish. It's very like, these are very young, these are kids who are going down into the abyss. And it looks very cutesy, but
So it
do
starts
not.
off.
Yeah.
It wants me to think it's a moe, and then it becomes
Well,
not
it's
that.
not even as much moe. It's like, it's more chibi. It's more just like chibi, I guess. It's just like super cutesy, not like sexy cutesy, just like little tiny little kid cutesy, you know?
Riker's Beard says Eva is the quintessential edgy, depressed 14-year-old anime.
Okay.
Well, I don't know, man. I'll think about it. But it appears that it's not too long. 26 episodes is pretty good. But it looks like there's a movie.
That's how much Cowboy Bebop was. So
yeah, looks like there's a movie that goes along with it. They ran out of budget, which is another thing people compare to Xenogears, is the ending is rushed or it's weird somehow.
Interesting.
Honestly, though, I've heard that like the creator of Evangelion, really liked the ending he did, or like there was a real strong purpose in it. It was very abstract though and symbolic.
Sure.
But then like the fans were pissed and they like sent death threats and they were like demanding that he alter it, you know, kind of how people do. And then the movie was his response to that kind of like fan culture. So he like gave them what they wanted, but you know, in like a sort of a sadistic way, right? Like trying to get back at them for how they treated him about his original ending.
Huh.
That's what I've heard. I don't know.
Interesting.
But I'm kind of interested in it. But Made in Abyss sounds good. I think I might try that one. I don't know. We'll see. I'll decide some other time. Riker's Beard says, honestly, though, you should skip both and get around to watching Babylon 5. Yeah, I should do that.
Yeah.
But if I talk about Babylon 5 on this podcast, no one will watch it. If I talk about Evangelion, like 90,000 people will probably watch it. No one wants to hear me talk about anything other than anime and JRPGs.
That's dude.
It's not my fault, man. I don't have a choice.
I was gonna say you might have.
Well, it kind of is my fault, to be honest. But
yeah, you might have led them that way a little bit.
It is my fault. I take full responsibility for all the weebs in this community.
Oh man.
Okay. Last thing, now that we've talked about how no one wants to hear me talk about anything other than JRPGs, I'm going to talk about Chernobyl instead.
Oh, perfect.
So I watched Chernobyl. It's a HBO miniseries about the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl in 1986, which is in the Ukraine at the time. That was Soviet Union. Actually, is it still technically part of? It's not part of Russia now, is it? Or did they?
No, it's not. Well, some of it is. Unfortunately,
some of it is, right?
Russia decided to invade.
They invaded it, right?
Crimea and Donetsk, whatever. Yeah. There's a couple places that are disputed territory, but UN recognizes it as Ukraine. But I think they've decided to let Crimea go. Just let Russia have it.
Glad Kaysen's here. He knows things about the world that I don't know. But the show was really good. Most people will get an HBO subscription so that they can watch Game of Thrones for a few weeks or whatever, and then like they just cancel it. It's kind of like a big joke. Like Game of Thrones ends, people just walk away. But if you still have it, or if you, I don't know, if there's anything else on the platform that interests you, Chernobyl is a good addition to their kind of library of things to watch. It was phenomenally well written, really well paced. The I don't know, it's just the acting was amazing. It was very informative, very accurate, historically accurate. I think like the only thing that they did to sort of simplify it was that the team of scientists that were working to try and like solve this problem. I mean, because it was a nuclear meltdown, right? And there was so many potential problems that they avoided. The heroic efforts of the Russian people to like prevent this from becoming something where like the entire continent would just be uninhabitable, basically. It's really inspiring stuff, kind of like showing you the heart of like the Russian people who sacrificed themselves to save millions and millions of lives. But the only thing that, at least that I could see from sort of a cursory glance at like what really was truly historically accurate or not, was that they had a huge team of scientists that were working together to try and solve this problem, and they sort of like took that whole huge team and they just put it into one character. So they have essentially two scientists in the show that are sort of like, working together to like, okay, we've poured sand and boson on the fire to get like to douse the fire, but like the heat in the fuel is just going to like essentially melt through the ground and contaminate the water supply that runs like what is like the Kiev River or something like that. That would like basically just poison the water for like an enormous number of people, like all of Ukraine, like every like this gigantic area would be totally uninhabitable. So, anyways, they were trying to like figure out, okay, what do we do? Like, how do we? It's an absolutely fascinating story that I think might be one of the best. I mean, I don't want to call it a movie. It's a mini series. It's like an hour-long episode, 5 episodes long. So, but I would classify it as a film personally, like one of the best films I've seen in a super long time.
Wow.
Just really, really, really well executed. Great drama. The acting's phenomenal. The only thing I didn't love about it, and I'm not sure why this choice was made, I haven't really researched it, is that like it's the show's in English, but it's about people living in the Soviet Union. But they're like British actors. They don't have like Russian accents or anything. I felt like that would have been a little better if like they at least spoke with Russian accents if they were speaking English. But in any case, I mean, aside from that one issue, it's like one of the best freaking things I've ever seen, and I recommend everyone like look into it because it was super good. Anyways, I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want anyone who decides to watch it. I don't want to like spoil anything. Not that like it's like something where spoilers would necessarily ruin the show because it's like about
it's an historical
something
event
that happened.
Yeah.
But like in terms of how it's made, like how it's paced, like the choices they make, just experience it for yourself. It's super good. I loved it.
Cool. I will watch it at some point.
Yeah, definitely do. Okay. So here's kind of the main topic we decided to talk about a little bit today. Why do people demand realism? And this is for gaming as well as movies. Something that I was thinking about a little bit this week, because this is something that is coming soon, but in the place where I work, we're starting like a movie review show that'll have a YouTube channel. I'll announce that and give you guys links to that when that's all up and ready to go. But Spider-Man Far From Home comes out this week. And so we wanted to do like a test to like feel it out, see like what works and what doesn't about the panelists we have and sort of the show structure. So we were going to review Spider-Man 3 as like a warm-up, which we all considered like the worst Spider-Man movie. However, I've not seen the Amazing Spider-Man 2, which is apparently the worst one. The one with Jamie Foxx as like the Electro Man.
Yeah. I never saw
apparently that one's worse, but I never saw that one. Anyways, we decided to review Spider-Man 3 because people love to hate that movie. So we thought it would be fun to do. But as I was sort of like putting my thoughts together on like what I was going to say about that movie, I came across a channel. Dang it, I should shout out the channel. Hold on. Because it's important to do that. Realism versus Formalism. Channel is called Patrick H. Willems. It's actually a pretty popular YouTube channel. Got about 250,000 subscribers. He's really great. Does a lot of really good. In fact, I'll just put it on the screen so you guys can see it. He does really good. I watched several of his videos. Here he is here. And he does film analysis. It's really good stuff. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out. Anyways, I saw a video of his on realism and formalism. Did you learn about these terms in film school, Casey?
I did not, actually. I did not learn about them.
So I guess I'll just sort of like start our conversation by like kind of defining. I'll probably do it in a pretty crude summation, and I might be a little bit like not totally accurate, but the idea I think we'll get across, right? Back when like film was really starting to become, it was a new art form, we'll put it that way, like back silent film or just past that sort of era. There was, again, I can't remember names. I've said this over and over on the podcast. I'm horrible with names. My memory does not go with names, so I can't remember names very well. There's one guy who had this philosophy about film that it should be moving towards realism as much as possible. Like that the goal of it should be to like reflect the real world, right? And then you have like other schools of thought moving towards what's called formalism, which is the other side, you know. So realism in like filmmaking terms would be like, okay, we're not going to do very many cuts. We're going to shoot mostly at eye level. We're going to not use a lot of music, as little or almost no non-diegetic music as possible. We're really just trying to like recreate very realistically a scenario. It's like the far end of the spectrum over here, right?
Right.
And formalism on the other side is like, let's use all these crazy techniques, music, editing, visual effects, you know, all kinds of more abstract ways of putting something together to elicit ideas or feelings or whatever. So it's a focus on the techniques, like the filmmaking techniques, and arranging them in these sort of abstract ways to create like the idea or to present the idea to the viewer, right? So essentially what this creates is dichotomy, if that's the right word, where you have this very unrealistic abstract way of presenting the concept, or you're trying to just like in the most realistic way possible, like recreate the idea or feeling or whatever.
Right.
And these there's not like a right or wrong way. These are just two very different approaches to an art form. And you know, I was well in the video, he talks about how the Hollywood blockbuster, which was sort of pioneered or created or at least like solidified with Jaws and Steven Spielberg,
right,
in like 1975, but then after that you have George Lucas coming in with Star Wars, and it just kind of like, you know, became basically Hollywood's biggest moneymaker ever since.
right.
Summer blockbusters
Yeah.
are like what Hollywood, where they get all their money now. Anyways, that was sort of like this like unifying central philosophy, the best of both worlds kind of a thing, right? Like meeting somewhere in the middle between the two things, where you're meant to like believe in the drama. You're meant to like feel like it's real. You're meant to feel like you're there with the characters, but they have a soundtrack playing over the top, right? The characters don't hear that non-diegetic music. That's just there to heighten or elicit the emotions. So they're using formalist techniques like that, but at the same time, they still want you to believe in it, right? So it's kind of like meeting between the two.
Yeah.
And so before that, though, like you go back into the 1940s and 50s, some of the most popular films at that time were like musicals and stuff, which are
Yes, yeah.
they're formalist. They lean that way. Like people, again, we talk about abstraction a lot with JRPGs and
Yeah.
stuff, right? Like you're not meant to believe the whole town erupted in song and dance out of
Exactly.
nowhere, right? It's just
Exactly.
they're expressing the feeling. Like one of my favorites is the Music Man, and the
Oh,
whole
sure.
town starts singing and dancing about the Wells Fargo wagon coming down the street, and they're all excited about what did the Wells Fargo wagon bring? You know, did they bring something for me? So there's this feeling of excitement in this small town, rural town, where nothing exciting ever happens, and it's meant to express how stoked people are for something exciting to happen in town for once. Like, but we're not really believing that an entire town in harmony, having memorized the dance moves and the lyrics and everything else, all kind of came out together and choreographed a dance scene and a song
Yeah.
to welcome the Wells Fargo wagon to come in, right? So that's a formalist technique or a series of techniques to express an idea. And that was really, really popular, or that was kind of more what filmmaking, or I guess mainstream Hollywood filmmaking was more kind of in that realm at that time. That's like what people went to the movies to see. Musicals were huge.
Yeah.
But Steven Spielberg, go ahead, what'd you say?
Well, it became kind of like a kid's thing. Like people don't really associate musicals anymore with something most people would go
and that was
watch.
mostly Disney because of
Yeah.
the animated films of the 80s and 90s and stuff. They were all musicals.
Yeah.
So anyways, Steven Spielberg and filmmakers at his time, sort of when the Hollywood blockbuster became the most popular kind of movie, they moved it a little bit more into this what's called classicism. So like we said already, a meeting between the two things. So anyways, tying this as quickly as I can back into like the whole Spider-Man thing, because I was trying to think of, because I knew that the other panelists were just going to hate on Spider-Man 3. I knew at least one of them was going to. So I wanted to have some different kind of perspective on it, just so that it would be a more interesting conversation than everyone just hating on the movie. But when you move into the 90s with Batman, like the beginning of like superhero movies that were actually decent or okay, passable movies. Batman was Tim Burton, and Tim Burton is a very, very formalist filmmaker. He's all about being wacky and weird and expressing ideas without being naturalistic.
It's very interpretive. You have to really dig into Tim Burton's material to find out what he was trying to say. He doesn't tell you up front. It's very, very interpretive.
And so that was, those movies were pretty popular, those first two Batmans, and then they got pretty bad after that, but still
they got pretty bad.
They were very vibrant. Like it wasn't trying at all to come across as realistic.
No, and it was all clearly like stage, set kind of stuff. It's not like they even went into like an actual city and filmed a robbery. It was like clearly a set on a stage with green lights and red lights and all this theatrics.
Right. Yeah, it's very performative, very theatrical. Especially that fourth one that was really bad, Batman and Robin.
And Robin, that way.
I think that the director had come from theater. I forget his name. Schumacher, I think was the name of the director of that film. Anyways, he had a background in more theatrical sort of directing and so that sort of thing. That's what I remember reading about him. I might be wrong about that, but anyways, superhero movies at that point were kind of at a low, and it was X-Men and Spider-Man that really started this whole craze we've been in for 2 decades now. Obsession of superhero movies as Hollywood blockbusters.
Slowly, yeah.
And I remember seeing Spider-Man and loving that movie when it came out. And I think the understanding the time period is pretty important. This is like right on the back of Lord of the Rings.
2001, 2002, maybe. Yeah.
And like the industry was making some pretty well, and Star Wars too, the Star Wars prequels. So CGI had come like really far in like that short span of time as we were moving from like Jurassic Park in the early 90s, but especially the turn of the century. And it was becoming something where like, oh, we can do these characters flying through the air and doing all these crazy stunts now because CGI has gotten to a place where we can make that look passable, or you know, people can believe in it. Especially for Spider-Man, who's like freaking like web slinging through a city. Like,
Yeah.
I remember there
yeah.
was a Spider-Man movie that I rented as a kid that came out in like the 80s or something. It was
Like live
so
action?
yeah, it was so
What?
bad.
I
It
never
was
heard
so
of it.
bad. Anyways,
That's funny.
anyways, I remember loving that and seeing Spider-Man 2 and loving that. And then like Spider-Man 3, everyone hated. And here's
Yeah.
where I thought it got really interesting is that Spider-Man 1 and 2 came out before Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And then Spider-Man 3 came after those two, I think, right? Did Dark Knight come out before Spider-Man 3? I think it did.
Probably 3. Yeah. No,
Okay.
Dark Knight. Batman Begins, definitely. I don't know about Dark Knight, though.
It might have been just after, but Batman Begins for sure. Anyways,
Yeah, definitely.
my point is that Chris Nolan stepped into that genre, which at that point, I think, especially Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies,
Yeah.
they were more...
Spider-Man 3 came out first.
Okay, so they had this tone to them, and I'll get into Sam Raimi as a filmmaker in a minute. He's the Evil Dead guy,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
A little bit of a formalist himself, not necessarily trying to make things feel realistic. That's just his style. But anyways, he had a tone in the Spider-Man films that was a little bit more like the early comics that were like, you know, a disaster is happening in the city and people gather around and point up in the sky. It's Spider-Man! You know, like that feel,
Yeah.
cheesy, campy feel to it. I think people forget how even Spider-Man 1 and 2 really like embraced that tone.
Sure.
And they remember it a certain way. And I think that as soon as Chris Nolan stepped in and was like, we're pushing this comic book adaptation, Hollywood blockbuster, a little bit harder in the direction of realism.
Yeah.
And that was so popular and people liked that so much. It was such a
Yeah.
fresh take on that genre at the time that I think that people saw Spider-Man 3, which had other problems for sure. And you know, I don't want to get into that because I want to kind of bring this back to video games as much as possible for the podcast.
Yeah.
There are definitely other problems with it. This is not the only thing. That's not what I'm getting at. But I think that people had this expectation about like, okay, we need the drama to feel really real and believable, especially for the content in Spider-Man 3 where like best friends are trying to kill each other and you have like the Venom symbiote and like, you know, people's association with that, you know, it's like a little bit of a darker Spider-Man story. Anyways, people felt like, I remember at the time being like, people not believing or not feeling it was realistic, like some of the things that happened in the movie. And as I was thinking about that concept, it's like, do people really believe that a story about a kid that gets bit by a radioactive spider and fights goblins up in the sky, like flying around throwing pumpkin bombs at people, do people really think that needs to be made to feel realistic? Sorry, I don't know what the last thing that you heard me saying there before you left. I was saying that do people were like complaining about I've heard people complaining about realism. It doesn't feel realistic that Peter Parker's like dancing. It feels so awkward and doesn't feel like... Anyways, people complaining about realism in some of these stories that are about a person getting bit by a radioactive spider. And
I know, it's kind of weird.
fighting a goblin in the sky who throws pumpkin bombs and incinerates people. Like people
Yeah.
having this tendency to be like, I want it to feel more realistic, right? I think this applies to video games, especially during the time too, which were becoming more and more lifelike in terms of what graphics could do,
That's a good point. Yeah.
and they're really pushing realism. But it was like, I don't know, it's hard for me to sort of like pinpoint like where I'm getting at with the point here, but like I don't think realism is the problem or formalism. I think those are two things that are just approaches. But I think whatever tone that you are working with needs to be consistent with the content and the approach, if that makes sense. So, um, let's say, for instance, like, well, okay, I'll just stick with Spider-Man 3 for now, and maybe you can think of some other stuff from games or something like that. But in Spider-Man 3, well, Sam Raimi, director of The Evil Dead, he will show you something that is like a truly terrifying image. It's like, whoa, it's a jump scare. But he will, like, within 10 seconds of that image, turn it into something comical by going way over the top with the gore or trying to gross you out really hard or something like that. I think Drag Me to Hell is another horror he did in more recent times.
Yeah.
And then I think the last movie that I know of he directed was Oz the Great and Powerful, that prequel to The Wizard of Oz. But you look at the colors of that movie and like the style of it and everything like that, it's very much not meant to feel like realistic, right? It's more formalist in its approach. That's kind of who he is, and he's a bit of a quirky guy, and so he's going to have in one instance something that's truly meant to terrify you or something that's meant to feel dramatic, and then the next instance he's going to try and make you laugh because that's just like what his philosophy of filmmaking is meant to kind of do both. It's meant to be entertaining. It's not necessarily meant to make you feel like it's real or realistic. So anyways, that's fine. That's an approach that can totally work. It works really well in The Evil Dead for people who are into those movies, right?
Yeah.
You're laughing 1 minute and like the next minute you're getting a jump scare. But for Spider-Man 3 in particular, where some of the story content involves like really difficult relationship issues, or at least that's what he's trying to sell you on. Sandman in that movie, like, you know, his daughter having like some kind of terminal illness, and they're really trying to play up the drama of that and him being motivated by that and being desperate. And like two best friends literally trying to kill each other and seek revenge and stuff like that. You got like these elements that it seems at points he's trying to really sell you on those emotions. But then you have like the infamous Peter Parker like emo dancing scene, and you have other parts that are just like really written on the nose and they feel really silly, right? And I think that the problem is not that something isn't more realistic. I think that that's what people say, but I think what's really happening is that they're confused by the tone. The tone here is indicating something more naturalistic in terms of the way the actors are, we're supposed to believe in this heavy drama or this heavy content. But then the next minute, like it's flipping it, and I don't know what to feel. You're sending me a little bit of a mixed message here, right? And so, anyways, I guess my whole point that I was trying to arrive at is that like there's this push for when there is a push for realism, like, oh, this doesn't feel very realistic. I don't think, especially in something that is more formalist, let's say a video game with a really cartoony style or something like that, because people are like, what are you expecting this to be realistic for?
Yeah.
I don't think that it's that there is probably some inconsistency in the tone. It's not like aligning with the content. They're trying to like make us feel something here that is more grounded, more serious, more dramatic, heavier, whatever. And that's not really suiting the approach.
It's a real feeling. It's not even a realistic feeling. It's a real feeling, right? So
Yeah.
they're trying to convey that. maybe that's its like grounded reality
Yeah,
kind of sense,
but like
but depends on how they do it.
I don't think you've seen Deadpool, but like
No.
that scene where Peter Parker's like being just completely oblivious and like dancing around, something like that wouldn't have felt out of place in Deadpool, which is completely self-aware. It
Sure.
is a comedy first. Even in they have like they sprinkle some dramatic moments in there, but there's always some levity to it. The tone is always completely consistent, and that's why it works. Um, Now I'm trying to think of like an example from video games, right? Well, let's just go with classic
Well,
Wind Waker, right? You're coming on the back of Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time, which had a certain aesthetic that really worked. There was some darker kind of like material in those games, like there's some kind of scary stuff, like the Shadow
yeah.
Temple, or even in when you're like one of the freakiest things in all of Zelda that I've ever seen. It freaked me out when I played it as a kid. You go underneath to that area where you get the Lens of Truth
In Kakariko,
underneath
yeah,
the
in the
well,
well.
and
Yeah.
there's those hands that grab your face
Well, and then the
while
big monster shows up, right?
yeah, and he comes at you slowly while you're struggling
Dude.
to get away from like the hand
Yeah.
that's gripping his face.
Yeah.
That like messed me up, dude.
That's creepy.
Um,
And I think that's the first time you see the Re-Deads also, the zombie looking dudes.
yeah,
And what the fetch are they doing? Like when they jump on you and they start like biting your head, and it's
yeah.
like you have no idea what to do. Actually, it's not the
You get like
first time you
frozen.
see him is when you become an adult and you're outside the
Hyrule
Temple
Castle
of Time.
Town. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyways, yeah, that stuff's all in Kakariko.
So they have this tone and aesthetic and everything that really like worked together. Because again, there's some really lighthearted moments in those Zelda games too, some funny moments and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But they picked
Yeah.
like the right balance between the two things. And then we moved to Wind Waker, and that like immediately like freaked everybody out in terms of the way it looked, especially when the industry was really moving towards, because that was such a huge jump. Like I was
Yeah.
looking at, I don't remember what it was the other day. There's some video. Anyways, it was showing like the evolution of a franchise from, and it went from PS1 to like PS2, and it's just like, dude, that was like
It's freaking insane.
massive, massive
Yeah.
jump in terms of just visuals and graphics. It was just like unbelievable. And a
Yeah.
big part of it too was frame rate. I remember
Oh, right. Sure.
when you guys got a GameCube, I didn't have one yet. I came over and I was blown away by the smoothness of Tony Hawk 3, I think it was.
Sure,
that you guys
yeah,
had.
sure.
Because I think that ran at 60
Tony
frames
Hawk
per
2,
second.
Pro Skater 2, I think. Yeah.
Because I think 2 was on the N64 and PS1.
Oh, really?
And then 3
It might
was
have
on the
been 3.
GameCube. Anyways, that's the first time I think in my life I had ever seen a frame rate higher than 30.
Yeah.
And I was just like, anyways, blown away by the graphical leap there. And of course, even the next generation was a pretty huge leap too. But during the early 2000s, there seemed to be this like heavy emphasis on realism, right?
Yeah. I think
In
because of
almost
that
everything.
leap, because all of a sudden realistic stuff seemed possible towards like the late 90s, and it was like that's just all people wanted.
Yeah. And so I wish I had more examples to draw from. So I'm going to kind of throw a blanket statement out there, and I'm admitting this. Obviously, it might not necessarily apply. If people have counterpoints in the comments or something, feel free to say so. But it seemed to me that was sort of like a push in the industry towards darker, grungier, more realistic, sort of, at least graphical wise. But that didn't necessarily always fit the tone. It was more like a marketing thing. Like, how realistic can we make it look and feel, especially in trailers, even if the story doesn't necessarily call for that. There's a inconsistency in tone that I'm talking about. Maybe it would have been served better in a more formalist approach, right? Like, again, Nintendo being kind of on the ball with that, like, understood with Wind Waker, like, we can't make the game look this way if this is the actual like feel that we're kind of culminating with this, right? The story, not that the story ever dictates what they do for Zelda games, but
Not necessarily.
at
Well, there,
least like,
yeah.
go ahead.
There's a comment here from I don't know how to say your name. Scene Daikemon, I suppose,
Yeah.
saying Japanese game developers, whether it's Zelda, Yakuza, Dragon Quest, or even Persona and Shin Megami Tensei, they tend to strike a balance of lighthearted tone with a layer of darkness underneath. I think that's why the darker qualities of Wind Waker are made to be more impactful. The darkness stands out more. It's like a contrast kind of
Using
thing.
a hard contrast for something like that. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Because if everything's realistic, I mean, you kind of need that contrast, and that's something that maybe stuff like The Dark Knight doesn't really have. I mean, there is maybe one scene in The Dark Knight where Bruce Wayne is having dinner with Harvey Dent, and they're all dressed up. He's got his tuxedo, and it's a nice event, and he's joking about how Batman's crazy. He jumps off rooftops, and who would ever do that, Other than maybe that one scene, the whole movie is literally, there isn't much contrast in terms of like, and I think it's very important to show what Batman is working towards. What is he trying to save? Right now, Dark Knight's a great movie. I think it was done very well. I wouldn't change anything about it, but it is lacking in the sense that there isn't much lightheartedness in the whole thing, because one of the one of the things that he's fighting for is for people to have the ability to live in that way, to have fun and joke and laugh, and he's the one that's got to be in the shadows to make sure that everyone else can live a fun life.
That sacrifice,
and
personal sacrifice.
Yeah, but they don't really show that. They don't show any of that happening. They don't show the lighthearted parts of the world. They just show the realistic, grungy, Batman-y parts of the world.
Well, I want to address, I think what it's Hydrated Cloth is saying here. A consistent tone is considered better, but it's not as though life has a consistent tone. Consistency in tone is unrealistic. So I think it's important to maybe
Sure.
to clarify, like, what I consider consistency in tone doesn't mean that there's only one note or only one tone for the whole movie, that you can only have one feeling. It has to be dark and it has to be serious all the time. I think consistency in tone is more about understanding whatever theme you're working with, or what the sort of like the, what would it be for a game, right? Like,
well, theme works. You do want
not just
consistency
the
of theme for sure.
Not just the story though. I mean, like, even like the gameplay, like the entire experience. Like, what is it at its core? Like, what's the core experience supposed to be? What's the player supposed to feel when they play the game? And making sure that, again, it's good to have contrast in everything you're doing in art. Like, contrast is really important. Like, it can get so boring if you're just doing one thing for a long time. I've said this in the past about like sound design, right? When I was doing the sound design on our Star Kart video, I wanted the power of the ship's engines to be felt and like constantly impactful. So I would take them away. I would remind the viewer of what it sounds like in the environment when the ships are not there. We would hang for a second after the ships would fly away, and we would hear the quiet. We would bring the noise down. And then in the next shot, when they would like come back
it's
in,
like, boom, it's very impactful. Yeah,
you get punched in the gut again. That kind of contrast is important all across the board in art. In your writing for the story, you need to have moments where you relieve the tension, right? You can't have tension all the way through the story. Otherwise, people get acclimated to it, and it's no longer tense. Like, it just is fatiguing. It's the same with something be too dramatic. If there's no comedy to release that, then it's just like I'm tired of this. It's a drudgery. Same thing with something being too lighthearted. It's like they never take anything seriously. So you have to have contrast, and it has to move. But I think consistency in tone, again, is not so much about just choosing one thing and sticking to that. It's more about like, okay, here's what you're supposed to really get out of this gameplay experience, whether it's what you're supposed to feel when you play the game, or you're supposed to feel thrilled. Is it supposed to be like a thrilling action thing? then we should probably spend a majority of the time delivering on that feeling. You know, if this is meant to be a heavy drama, then we need to really pay off in a way that will give the person that experience when they leave the theater or when they, done playing the game. So it's more about pacing it in such a way to where you can relieve the tension and keep it interesting. But overall, there is a consistency in tone. It doesn't feel like it's at odds with itself.
Sure.
It's not undermining itself with the comedy. The comedy is there to help us feel the right amount of contrast so that we can really appreciate the drama.
You know what's funny about that is that in Star Wars Episode 1, Jar Jar Binks does feel like he's undermining the comedy of Episode 1. Yes. Does feel like it's undermining the theme and the other elements of that film.
Right.
So it was done well in the original trilogy. It was not done well in the prequels.
And, it's really hard. This is why I didn't really have a lot of examples off the top of my head. It's hard to pinpoint this because it is so subjective. I mean, there are some people who legitimately thought Jar Jar Binks was a funny character and he was fine. And it's like, whatever, it's for kids. And what undermines it for one person may not for another. But I don't know, to me, that's what I felt while I was watching Spider-Man 3, was that it was like, at least to me, the content of that movie lent itself a little bit more to taking itself a bit more seriously than the previous two movies had. Because they're kind of culminating this whole love triangle story between Harry and Peter and Mary Jane. And two best friends are literally trying to freaking kill each other. That's a little... I guess there probably would be a way, like a Deadpool way, to make that funny and lighthearted and work. But I think Raimi is really trying to make you feel something in the movie too. Like the scene where Sandman first sort of materializes and he's got that little pendant of his daughter and he tries to reach and grab it, but the sand in his hand is sort of, and it kind of just oh, he can't grab it. And
he can't hold it.
And they show expression in his face. It's a really brilliant scene in my opinion. I felt something when I watched that. They expressed all these emotions without words and without any kind of detailed facial expression because his face is made of this loose sand. But I thought it was really well done. And I felt like that character really worked to show Peter he's just a mirror of what Harry's doing to him, this revenge seeking, because they retconned in the dumbest way ever that the Sandman guy is the one who killed his Uncle Ben. Anyways, that was dumb. But I
forgot that.
As a, I guess if you just accept that they needed to do that for the purpose of letting Peter have this seeking revenge sort of plot or subplot in the story, and that he has to learn to forgive the same way Harry has to learn to forgive. If the movie's theme is revenge in this way, it's hard for me to accept that he wants me to really take that seriously in one scene, but then over here he's trying to just make it lighthearted. It's just entertainment. It's just it's wacky, and to me, it undermined it. It undermined the message. It went too far. The two tones were too far separated from each other.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, again, trying to tie this back into the point. Realism and formalism are just two different approaches that are both perfectly valid. I think where you have problems where people might desire it be one way or move more this way is the fact that you're not using the right tone consistently enough for the approach you chose. If you chose a formalist approach, but you're trying to really sell people on this heavy, deep, emotional stuff, that's not to say you can't have a cartoon style and also, you know what I mean? You could still do that.
Yeah.
I'm just making a generalized statement about if you want it to feel realistic, then you can't. Not saying you can't at all, but generally your tone should try and match that. And if it doesn't, people are going to be like, oh, this doesn't feel right because you're just swinging too much between tones and it's kind of undermining the
Sure.
central point.
Well, Kingdom Hearts has come up a lot in the chat since you've been talking about that.
Yeah, Kingdom Hearts
And
really undermines itself, in my opinion.
absolutely oscillating like crazy on the, like, what are you going for? And it's partly because they're combining so many different things and they're sort of trying to preserve the elements from those things, like the characters and the stories, but they're so different, and it just kind of leads you on this roller coaster that doesn't, it feels very, very disjointed. And you've got some heavy moments with some moments that really just don't make sense, and some really lighthearted moments. And I think it does that way too much. It's fine for what it is, I guess, because they're trying to combine all the Disney movies. But in terms of just story and it's standalone, just Kingdom Hearts, what it is, it's way too much.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I don't want to talk too much about Kingdom Hearts. I'm not even that educated on it personally.
Well, but he does this.
But at least to me, the first game felt like it had the right tonal consistency, right? It didn't feel like it was trying to be like a deep or profound game necessarily. It wasn't like it was just like, this is a fun idea. And, we have some like emotional attachment to the three characters from, what is that? I want to say Outset Island. That's not it. That's Zelda.
Yeah.
Destiny Island.
Yeah.
Destiny Island's in the beginning, right?
Destiny, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Riku and Sora and Kairi, right?
Yeah.
There's some emotion that you feel there between those characters, but it's not meant to be like heavy. It's not trying to like purport itself as being profound. And I feel like as it went on, it tried to like give this illusion that, like, especially in the writing, the poetic way it was written, it's like, this is deep, bro. Like, pay attention. But it's like,
but it's so lighthearted.
It's Disney characters, and it's kind of silly, and that's okay. Like, that's kind of the concept was to begin with, and why can't we just embrace that? Anyways.
Okay, there were some other really good comments from a while ago. Believe it or not, Jonah the man, I did keep your comments. I kind of copied them just for later whenever we had a break.
Oh, nice.
Jonah the man had a very interesting observation. He says, I think the reason we demand realism in fiction is because of something called naive realism. We see the world using ourselves as a center point, so we dislike it when we see something we're not familiar with or cannot comprehend. This may be doubly so for people with high systemizing brains, which is often accompanied by more materialistic worldview that has difficulty grasping the supernatural, fantastical, or otherwise unrealistic. So he continues saying, humans in general are not good at perceiving the world objectively as it is. Instead, we see the world as we are, and our perceptions of ourselves and our minds are heavily distorted with cognitive biases. I think the reason we demand realism in fiction is because the world as a whole is becoming more materialistic. We are increasingly unwilling to accept fantastical or inconsistency in an era where superstition is regarded negatively. Now, that last line, I think I would agree with him. But generally speaking, think about objective reality. It's actually basically impossible for humans to truly perceive objective reality. So when we talk about realism or this isn't realistic, what we're really talking about is us, the way that we have perceived reality up to this point, which is quite different from other people.
That's a very good point, actually. Yeah. And that's why people disagree so hard on whether or not something feels believable or not, right? Like, I mean, my entire last several years of making videos on the channel and discussing and trying to talk about like whether or not Sephiroth being revealed too early or something in Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to be a problem enough for the storytelling. I mean, it's really opened my eyes to just like, because there's just so many people who like totally disagree, who totally see it differently from me, who just like, we both loved the same original game so much, but for such totally different reasons. I've had some debates with people about whether or not the changing the battle system is like fundamentally changes the spirit of the game. And it's crazy how true that is. Like objective reality, nobody knows what that is. Everybody has their reality painted by their own experience. And
you sound like a stoner. Like what is reality, man? What's real is just what you're perceiving. Or like what is in the Matrix? What's his name? What does Morpheus say to Keanu Reeves? He says, if what is real? If you're referring to things that you can see, smell, taste, or touch, then real is simply neurons firing off in your brain, because that's where all those signals are interpreted. So what is real? Is real the neurons in your brain? Because those same neurons sometimes give false information to you.
I forgot about that scene. I wish I had remembered that, because I think I did a podcast a couple months back where essentially I was citing studies about that, about how people can essentially see the same thing but have a totally different experience, because the way that your brain formed when your neural connections were made as a baby based on the experiences you had growing up, whether you associated that with something negative or positive, for just thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of things that are completely different from this person over here and their experience. Like it's just about how those neurons are being interpreted in the brain. Right. That is literally the difference.
That's the difference.
That's why someone can love this chocolate cake and this person's like, I hate chocolate. Like, how? How could you hate it? It's so delicious. I taste it. I'm interpreting that it's good. How can you not like that? It's crazy. Like how we're trapped in these individual minds where we have no concept, because our brain chemistry and the way that our brains have formed their neural connections are different from other people. We have no way of actually perceiving the world the same way they do. We have to rely on language to try to describe it, but it's like so inefficient to do that. Like it's crazy. It's really crazy.
Dude, I have a potentially extremely, what's the word, controversial example to bring up about this in general. Now, it wouldn't be my opinion or anything. It would just be kind of saying the facts. But it's entirely possible for two people to literally think the exact same way, but fall on opposite ends of like of a fight, I guess, or of like a disagreement. But they have the exact same thought, but it's not. It's the way that everything's kind of interpreted, or maybe it's their social surroundings or whatnot that lead them to where they are. But they actually see the same exact problem and have almost the same exact solution. And my example was going to be something along the lines of like the abortion debate in the United States, where you've got one person who could think abortion should be illegal except in these cases, if like mother's life's in danger, or if, the doctor or whatever, if there's like rape or something like that. And then and they're saying, I'm pro-life, right? I'm pro-life. I believe abortion should be illegal, except in these cases. Then you got this people saying, abortion, I'm pro-choice. Abortion should be legal because rape or incest or life of the mother in danger, right? Now, when you look at those two opinions, right? One person saying, I'm pro-choice because you should be able to have the choice to do this if this bad thing happens to you. And this person saying, I'm pro-life because you shouldn't do it unless this thing happens to you. They actually have the same opinion.
Yeah.
They actually are saying like the same thing. But one of them is over here on this camp shouting with a megaphone saying, oh, you're so bad. And the other person's here shouting with the megaphone saying, oh, you're so bad. And they have the exact same opinion.
Yeah.
Like that, but it's all how it's social, or it's all how their brain kind of interprets different things. And they just decide, oh, I fall on this side of the debate. Obviously, this is the only logical place to be. And this person's like, oh, but they have the same thought. It's like crazy. And I don't quite know what to do with that analogy. That I remember I was thinking about that a few weeks ago, but it's just like people, even when your brain does interpret things the same way, you can still fall on complete opposite sides of the spectrum from somebody else.
Yeah. Well, it's even just, I mean, this has been my experience too. Like even just interpreting the way someone's describing their opinion and just like not really understanding it, right? It's just, you're explaining to me what your position is. And we could completely agree, like you're saying.
100%. In fact, it's very likely that
we could be saying the same exact thing.
Yeah.
But it's just the words that you chose to use and the way that I interpret your words can still lead us to think that we're in opposition. Like, that's happened to me, I think, a number of times, arguing about, video games online. It's like I go back and like really look at what that guy's saying or read over it again. It's like, I think we're not actually disagreeing, really.
Right.
Like, we're just looking at it from a little bit of a different perspective, but I think that we mostly, anyways, it's just weird. It's
weird. That's a huge problem in our society, though.
It's so hard to like really, again, like we have this heightened sense of empathy, right? Humans do. Our evolved brain gives us the ability to make the attempt to, okay, how can I see it from their point of view? Can I empathize with their pain?
Right.
Can I try to feel what they feel? We make these attempts to do it. It's like part of who we are, but we really honestly can't ever truly do that. Like we can say I've had a similar feeling as far as I know, because I've felt this way. I've never felt the same emotion you've felt, but it seems similar as we discuss it. So like we can sort of like relate, but I can't ever actually experience or feel the same emotion another person felt. So you can't ever really know. Anyways.
Yeah. Because you're lacking that context.
The nature of was it Jonah who brought it up?
Jonah the Man, yeah.
Yeah, Jonah the Man. The nature of our existence is completely painted by this bias that you cannot ever really overcome. I don't know how we got onto this from... How is this tying into our topic?
Why do people demand realism? You know what's funny? We haven't even mentioned Final Fantasy IX. No. And I'm pretty sure Final Fantasy IX was one of the big instigators for this whole thing, because some people didn't like the art style after Final Fantasy VIII, and they were like, oh, I was hoping it would just keep getting more and more real forever, and realer and realer and realer all the time. And it turns out Final Fantasy IX's art style has held up very, very well in ways that maybe Final Fantasy VIII's hasn't. I don't know. Final Fantasy VIII still looks fine. It's like an anime, I guess. But Final Fantasy IX had such a unique art style, and Wind Waker also, the thing you brought up before, that people remember it so well in a way that if it had gone for this super realism, it wouldn't have been quite as...
The tone wouldn't have felt consistent. Like the tone they were going for in 9, I think really suited the art style. Yeah. And it would have felt inconsistent, I think, if they had made it look like FF8 in terms of like the way that those characters... Because it was more expressive. We talked about cartoons. Yeah. You can... And anime, you can be more expressive with it, with the face, and you can like go way beyond realism. That's actually a good point. We talked about like Donald Duck cartoons, and they're like slamming each other with like sledgehammers and stuff. Like obviously that's a formalist idea. We get the idea of pain or embarrassment.
Yeah.
Eyes popping out of the head, like whoa, being scared. But if that were depicted realistically, that would be horrifying.
It would be awful, yeah.
So you can express an idea or a concept in a more formalist way, and everyone can laugh at it or like understand the concept of, oh, what an embarrassing situation, or oh, like that guy's really evil, like he has like bad intentions. And just the face is like so like jacked, especially in anime. They do some really messed up like evil, and pain and torture. Like they can make faces look really like freaky, but you can't get that in like a person's face can't emote that way, right? So it's not realistic, but you still get the idea. The exaggeration still works. You still, because it feels like it's that intense, even though it's not actually that intense in real life. Anyways, this has been pretty all over the place.
Oh, and I also have one other thought that I think we'd mentioned before we started streaming, was that people think they want realism.
Yes.
People think they want realistic graphics and everything like that. And in the moment, sure, it's super fun. You get the newest, latest, greatest thing, right? But it almost never holds up, and reality sometimes isn't. I don't know. Just this stuff
exciting.
doesn't always hold up forever, right? The best CG movie back 20 years ago doesn't look all that good anymore, but it's what people wanted then. But it's stuff that, like, if you focus elsewhere other than pure realism, you will likely create something that's more likely to be seen as timeless, as opposed to just making whatever was in the moment and people look at it and they're like, oh, that was the 90s. Yeah, that was definitely the 1990s.
Yeah,
and that's
right.
like it's hard to get past that. So Wind Waker accomplished that in a way that, maybe Twilight Princess didn't. Even though Twilight Princess looked cool for the time specifically, Wind Waker by far has the superior visuals, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well,
yeah.
That's it for that.
That's it.
Let's talk about community stories. We have a Kickstarter here from Michael McConian. I think we actually showed this off once before.
Oh, before it was,
because he had been working on it. But I think that the Kickstarter is now live. Let me put this on screen.
It seems like it's doing pretty well too.
He's making a board game called Dance Card, and I am going to let the video play. So I'm just going to be quiet and just let his Kickstarter play. I will also put a link to this in the chat, and it will be in the video description, of course, later. But the concept of this game is like it's a high school dance. And so it's a board game. And you're trying to dance. So you have like a chosen character. You draw a card and you're that character. And you're trying to dance with your 3 assigned partners first. You're trying to be the first to dance with all 3 people. And whoever dances with all 3 first wins the game. So it's anyways, it's like a high school dance. I'll kind of let this video play and you guys can check it out.
Hi, I'm Isabel, and I've got to tell you about Dance Card, the cool new competitive gateway game for 2 to 4 players. Dance Card is set during my high school homecoming dance and includes all the excitement and tension that goes along with it. Each player takes on the role of a student at Saxon High, and the goal of the game is to dance with all 3 of your dance partners. The first player to do this wins the game. But who even are you? At the start of the game, you'll draw a dance card, which shows you the student you'll be playing. You can draw a dance card at random or pick the character you relate to most. There are 32 unique students to choose from, including yours truly. And each one of us has a one-of-a-kind special ability. Okay, it's time to play! Each player can take up to 2 of the following 4 actions on their turn. There are so many options. First, a player can take Move action, which lets you pick a student on the board and move them to an adjacent location. You can pick any student, not just your own. Then you can take the Dance action, that's my favorite, which lets you roll dice to try and impress one of your dance partners. There's so many ways to build up your dice pool, so think strategically. Then you can take a Chat action with the friends of your partner. Doing this gets you a permanent bonus to dance rolls with that partner, so it pays to be a social butterfly. And finally, you can take a Nerve action, which lets you ditch any failure tokens from bad dance rolls, and gets you a few smooth move cards to help you do better next time. Pretty easy, right? But there's lots of room for strategy and a lot of challenges to get in your way. Close friends, pesky rivals, distracting crushes, killjoy chaperones, and other overlapping game mechanics will all affect your dance roll. Dance Card even has special challenge cards for players who want to play in hard mode. With colorful art and a fun, contemporary theme, Dance Card is a great way to get kids and new gamers into a hobby you love, while still providing a challenge and hours of replayability for experienced players too. Pledge now and hit the dance floor. Oh, they're playing my song!
All right. I gotta say, that is a really impressive Kickstarter video. Really nice work there, Michael. And they're doing pretty well on the goal so far. They look to be getting pretty close to halfway there. But it's a really unique concept for a game. I've never really seen anything like that before. And so if anybody's interested in backing that project, go ahead and again, I guess I'll put the link in the chat one more time. I love the art style. I think that it's again a really unique concept. I haven't really seen something like that before. I think it's something definitely worth supporting.
Hydrated Claw says too realistic.
Too realistic. It's post-traumatic stress from your high school days, trying to dance with people at the dance. Too real, man. Too real. Anyways, think it looks great. It was really impressive, and the video was really impressive too. Love those After Effects camera moves. Nice use of light. Nice use of what's the word I'm looking for? Focal, not focal length. Depth of field.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Really, really well done. Whoever put that video together did a really good job. So, big fan. I think that's worth supporting. Check it out. Kickstarter.com. All right, guys, that's it for today's podcast. Thank you for watching. I think next week I'm going to try to bring on Games is Lit again. Games is Literature.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
He had a series of tweets the other week. I liked the entire freaking thread. I was just like going through like. But it was a really interesting sort of take on, like, somebody was disparaging a video that he had made talking about like the stories in video games are like don't matter, or they're like, you know, they're stupid or whatever. Like focusing on game narrative is pointless. Like what do you like? You know, just essentially like dismissing game narrative as being really bad and cringy and stupid. And he had a really good response to that. I would love to have a full discussion with him on the idea of the importance of game narrative, because he actually taught games as literature, which is where the name of the channel comes from. He taught that in like high school. He had like a whole class where it was like a literature class, but they used game stories to like teach the literature. And at first, like the staff was like really against it and thought like, you know, what merit is there in this? But by the end of the semester, he said like, oh, these kids are like really learning the principles and like really enjoying it because they were playing through a video game to learn that stuff instead of like reading a classic piece of literature like they would normally do, right? Instead of like reading, I don't know, Fahrenheit 451 or I don't know, the Odyssey or Shakespeare or something like that. They were instead playing a video game to learn the same literary principles. So I'd like to have him on to discuss like his approach to that class and like what he learned through that experience. I thought it was a really interesting little thread, a series of tweets that he had. So I'm going to reach out to him. And
cool. That'd be awesome. I hope we can
Anime is literature. I just saw that from Colin. Anime is literature.
Yeah, anime is literature. Yeah.
Anyways, that's what I'm going to try and do that next week. I'll reach out to him. So look forward to that. Otherwise, you guys have a good weekend and peace out.